All right, folks. Greetings. Week 3, our third week of COM 404, Principles of Persuasion. This is the last week of our first of 5 units. And this first unit is about basic stuff, right? Basic principles of persuasion. Key themes, core basic stuff, recurrent issues, major concepts, broad outlines kind of stuff. So last week we looked at reasoned action and elaboration likelihood. And this week we're looking at some fun stuff. Cognitive dissonance theory, chapter 9 from Perloff right here. And then after that we're going to look at inoculation, chapter by Josh Compton. This is coming out of a different book. Similar but different. And this video is on the first one on cognitive dissonance theory. As always, here's the fresh off the press reading notes to correspond with the reading and the video. And I'll dive in. I'm going to do a separate video on inoculation theory that will be coming shortly after. And then at the end of this week, we're going to have our first quiz. It'll be covering what we've covered. So these are going to be very important for you as you're studying. Please work through them. I don't spell everything out down to the letter. Sometimes I just say, please be familiar with these 5 things on this page. Sometimes if a concept is a little bit richer and more complex, interesting, confusing, I'll say a little bit more about that. Sometimes it's a little bit cut and dried, and I'll just say, please know that, So these are like your study guides. If anything on these pages are not making sense, then by all means reach out and let's chat. But I think a lot of this stuff is pretty, not too difficult, although this cognitive dissonance stuff is really fascinating. So let's go ahead and dive in. Chances are you've heard this phrase before, cognitive dissonance. I'm experiencing cognitive dissonance, or, oh, look at him, he's having cognitive dissonance. So as the term suggests, cognitive, which is cognition, it's how we're processing our thoughts, and then the dissonance part is like static tension, right, conflict. So we're talking about a kind of internal conflict here, and we experience this all the time. Why? Because life is so rich and varied and nuanced and dynamic and changing, and so are we as individuals. We're growing, we're evolving, we're changing, we're having different kinds of experiences. We have what we think are our core beliefs, core views or whatever, and then we go and encounter something new and different, and it forces us to revise those things. We are not computers. We are not angels. We are flawed, biased, partial, local, situated human creatures. And so we're always only experiencing just a tiniest fraction of reality, existence, right? And so our brains do this incredible work of trying to cover as much ground, sort of spatially, geographically, cosmically, intellectually. It covers as much ground as we can, but it doesn't always line up with our actual on-the-ground experiences, right? And so we often have this kind of dissonance between what we think and what we now are kind of experiencing and confronted with. Some obvious examples are, I just threw them on this page here. Like, I personally think that it's probably necessary to reduce our, meat consumption, right? At least the kind of mass-produced, factory-farmed, industrial-grade kind of poultry, cows and pigs and so on, because the system is just horrible. It's horrible for everyone involved. It's horrible for the environments. It's horrible for the animals. It's horrible for the people who work there and get paid nothing to put their lives in danger. It's turning living creatures into commodities, and it spoils the environment, and it's jacked with all kinds of hormones and chemicals, and it's bad for our bodies, and da-da-da-da-da. There's so many different reasons, and yet, give me that hamburger. It's like we have these kinds of tensions all the time, and so this is the cognitive dissonance thing. And we're talking about it in this kind of persuasion context because persuasion is kind of dealing with the fact that humans are always kind of going through this process of like reconcile, dealing with tensions, trying to overcome tensions, being confronted with difference, with change, with newness, resolving it, figuring it out, rationalizing. I think the word rationalize is a really important one for this chapter in terms of like how it is that we attempt to reduce dissonance. We don't like dissonance. We don't like carrying around inner kind of disagreements with what we think we believe and what we're doing, or what we have kind of stated as our belief or preference or whatever. So many things are, sorry, I almost went on a jag there. I just refrained myself, but there was a really interesting example I wanted to talk about. But I have a bunch of interesting examples. I remember I was in a grocery store a few years ago. I wonder if this has ever happened to you, but like, apparently I'm one of these, have one of these faces that like reminds people of other people, you know? And so I was in the grocery store and some guy came up to me and he was just doing that thing where he kept looking at me and he was kind of looking and smiling and like looking for that kind of moment of recognition. And I was noticing him notice me, and I was waiting for him to come up because it was just like obvious that he wanted to kind of come say hi and talk to me. So I was like, "What's up, man?" And he's like, "Hey, do you know Jimmy da-da-da?" I'm like, "Nope, sorry." He's like, "Did you go to this high school in Las Vegas?" Because like you look that age. It's like, "No, man, sorry, I'm Canadian. I went to high school in Canada. I didn't move to Vegas until like 2004. He's like, "Really? So you don't know Jimmy's brother? What about Jimmy's brother?" I'm like, "I just told you that I was in Canada in high school," and he wouldn't let go of it. In his mind, he was convinced that I was this person, so like a friend, someone he grew up with and had great fond memories of, and he just like locked into this belief, right? Like, you're that guy. And it was so funny because I was like, "Yep, sorry, dude. Canadian. I don't know what to tell you. I'm not lying here. Like, I just was not in Las Vegas going to high school." But he wouldn't let go of it. So even finally when he was like, "Okay, that's weird," but he still wouldn't let it go. So then he's like, "Well, we're still friends, so I'm going to just talk to you," right? So then he's like, "So what are you doing here? You're Canadian, eh? So what do you do here now?" And I'm telling him all about like coming to grad school and getting a professor's job at UNLV. And we're becoming kind of friends because he's already convinced I am his friend. And it was just fascinating to me. I walked away and I was like, that whole time he never let go of this notion that like I'm someone he knew. It was just like, so he like refused to resolve this difference. Like, he just turned me into his friend. So he became friendly toward me even though like I didn't know him from anyone. It was quite interesting. But that was him struggling with the dissonance and refusing to let go of the fact that like he had this idea, here's this person who reminded him of it, but not, factually speaking, not the same, but like couldn't get through it, you know? So yeah, so dissonance, cognitive dissonance is a really common thing. It's a very fundamental part of just living our lives every day, right? So, you know, how can we think about this? Number 3 is pretty good here. This description by Aronson. Dissonance is a negative and unpleasant state that occurs whenever a person holds two cognitions that are psychologically inconsistent. And my comment here is that I think unpleasantness is the really kind of key part of that description. It's unpleasant when we experience or encounter this kind of disconnect between what we are convinced of right now and some kind of new information or some kind of new, you know, action that we've taken that's now forcing us to try to sort of stare at the fact that we believe this, but we just said this, or we just did this, and it's not the same, right? Or like, I don't know, you know, you're a hardcore sports fan, choose your sports team, right? And you're going out on a blind date with someone, and it turns out that they're incredible and beautiful, and you're super attracted to them, except they're the fan of the opposite team, your rival. What do you do, right? Like, you might lie. You might say that you're actually like a big fan of theirs. You can imagine the comedic possibilities here. I think a lot of like sitcoms are rooted in, like, I'm thinking Seinfeld episodes here. Like, how do you resolve the hypocrisy? How do you resolve the disconnect between what you what you carry around internally and sort of what you are confronted with externally. There could be an internal-external kind of element here that the chapter doesn't get into. I'm just trying to think this through a little bit. But we're talking about like our deeper inner stuff that's already there, and we're talking about kind of new stuff that's coming at us from the outside. And if we embrace it, now we are forced to kind of like deal with that disconnect, right? And this happens all the time in terms of like people ask us for our agreements and we give it even if we don't actually agree, right? I just had this experience earlier today. I was dealing with someone in the office and they gave me some information that I knew to be false, but this person is a little sensitive and doesn't usually like being challenged, even though I knew that what they were telling me was wrong. And I was just like, okay, let's go with that. And I knew inside, like, no, this is wrong. Why didn't you just say that it's wrong what that person just said? It's like absolutely wrong. But instead of like, confronting that person and getting into some big thing, it was just like, oh, okay, yeah, all right, I'll look into that, or I'll see kind of thing. So that's me just like wimping out and deciding not to do anything about it in the moment. But again, the dissonance was there, and it was like, tripped me up, So what's next here? So this notion of, on page, what are we dealing with here? 230, yeah, so 238, 239, there's like 1 through 6, different hypotheses related to this theory. And there's some consistency here, right? Dissonance is uncomfortable. We don't like it. We don't like being in this place of like internal disconnect with our own selves, right? We think this thing, but we just said that, or we believe this, but we did something contrary to that. Now we're like, we can't fall asleep. We're like, why did I do that? Or why did I say that? Or like, who am I? It just throws us into this like turmoil. And that's fascinating. That I think is the real kind of the source of persuasive possibility. I think the reason that we think about all this kind of stuff in a class on persuasion is because persuasion is all about kind of moving people or getting them into a kind of new place. And dissonance is all about that tension between where we are and where we're going, or what we've just done and who we think we are, right? And so persuasion is playing in that space between, the established and the possible. Ooh, that's good, right? And so, dissonance is also in that kind of realm of where we are and where we're going. And so I think that's the key stuff here. So let's see. This is fascinating. Dissonance and decision making. This gets to my inner outer thing, right? Because inside our brains, we're always thinking and processing. And in our minds, I think that we all think we're kind of perfect and we have things figured out. We're always trying to kind of walk around like, how do I think about the world and what is my position? At least I do. It's like, am I consistent? Am I doing over here what I'm saying over here? We're always trying to kind of be coherent to ourselves and how we present ourselves to the world, right? I mean, it's easier to do that when we're just taking a shower, driving to school or work or whatever, or having a stroll or just, sitting around or whatever. We can just kind of like sort everything out and kind of like get rid of the stuff that is exceptional and just kind of like hold together all the things that seem to go together. And it's like, that's me, But when it comes time to making a decision, or when it comes time to kind of being forced into an action or into an agreement or into a commitment, now we've got that kind of externalizing of our incipient, kind of attitudes and beliefs and so on. And because it is this kind of real putting the oar in the water of like making the decision, acting, stating something publicly, outwardly, or whatever, we are essentially now committing to one of potentially infinite sort of scenarios that we might have worked out in our mind, right? And it kind of makes it real, and it's planting your flag on the ground essentially, and kind of saying like, here's what I actually am, and here's what I actually say. There's this concept of, I don't have it in here, but it just popped in my head, this notion of a revealed preference, right? So we often talk about things that we like. And these are my favorite foods, right? But if you say like, I love sushi and I love vegan and but if you look back on your Uber purchases for the last 3 months, and every time you order something, it's hamburgers, it's Mexican, it's, it's whatever, right? It's Italian, that's your revealed preference. Your revealed preferences is what you actually do in real time. Whereas you might actually walk around thinking, I'm the sort of person who loves highfalutin this or that. But when it comes to like actual decision time, actual purchase time, you go in the same direction over and over and over again. Now there's a disconnect between sort of what you think of yourself as and who you actually are. I'm fascinated with this idea of a revealed preference because I feel like we all kind of walk around thinking that we are all this or we have these kinds of, beliefs, values, aspirations, and so on and so on. And a lot of times there's a kind of discrepancy or disconnect, a gap between sort of who we think ourselves as and who we actually are in terms of our actual behavior. What was that Batman line? It's not, it's what I do that defines me, right? It's not sort of who I think of myself as, it's what I do, right? That's the revealed preference part of it. And here I was thinking about my son, Calix. He's maybe not quite as bad. He's becoming a teenager. He's getting a little older. But, when he was younger, man, maybe all kids are like this, but it's like, okay, here's $10. We're going to the store. It's Friday night. We're going to get some snacks. We're going to go watch movies, whatever. Like, go crazy. $10. Maybe it's $20. Who knows? Whatever. Here's some money. To him, being a young kid, it's like all the money in the world. And he's so excited, right? And you see him and it's like, all right, dude, you got 15 minutes to go choose yourself something. And you think to yourself as the adult, this is heaven for a kid, right? Because he has, in his mind, all the money in the world and he has all of the choice in the world. And it's like, you can't go wrong, right? It's like, just choose this or this or this. What I noticed is over time is the dissonance that my son would experience when you allowed him to choose his own treats, his own desserts, his own snacks, whatever. He would get so overwhelmed because he wanted it all and he couldn't decide. But having to decide means having to say no to all these things that you care about. And he would get so worked up. What should I do? I don't know what to do. Should I get this? I don't know what to do. And I'd see this poor kid agonizing over having to make a choice. And so I wrote Calix in the column here. He used to get angry. He would get angry as soon as he made his purchase. He was instantly angry because it was like regret. I should have gotten that instead. I should have gotten that instead. I should have gotten that instead. So sitting around longing and thinking about all the possibilities is one thing. Now you have to choose. Now you have to make it real. You got to kind of go with one or two directions. But all it's doing is kind of confronting you with all of the stuff that is left behind, right? So dissonance and decision-making. Decision-making means the abstract, the possible, the kind of the cognitive, the unlimited cognitive possibilities are now landing in real time. And that very fact of like making a real choice presents all of that kind of tension because it's no longer just fictional, hypothetical, or whatever. It's now real. You've kind of stated it. It's like, this is what I want. Am I actually the kind of person who does this? Am I actually the kind of person, right? So you have to kind of confront your choices and how they sort out with your assumed preferences, right? I love the stuff on 240 there. I wrote in the column, rationalize. These are all different ways that we rationalize. In moments of dissonance, what do? How do we get out of it? We rationalize, and these are all different ways. We change our attitude. We add consonant cognitions. We derogate the unchosen alternative, right? It's like, well, if I could have done this or that, but I went this direction, now I'm going to say to myself, well, I didn't really like those things anyway, right? We just convince ourselves that what we're doing, we're always doing this. It's got to be some basic fundamental human trait. We're always in this mode of rationalizing what we're doing, even if it's totally inconsistent with who we thought we were, even if it's totally, doesn't make sense or whatever, if it's totally out of line or whatever, rationalize. So we suppress thoughts, we alter the importance of cognitive, all these 8 different ways that we rationalize. Quite interesting. Page 241, we get in this business of effort. I think that just kind of buffers out what I was just saying about kind of putting your oar in the water. There's something to do with effort, energy, action. The very fact that we are taking the time, spending the money, expelling the energy to do something, to say something, to buy something, to commit to something. There's something in that expressive effort, the action itself, which once we've expended the energy, once we've engaged in the thing itself, we've gone from thought to action, now we rationalize backwards if there is a disconnect, right? So the expenditure of effort becomes its own kind of source of proof, right? And so this becomes this really powerful way of creating conviction. Just think about, the example in the book here is like initiation or hazing. Think about the kinds of things that we do in order to become part of something, even if it's not rational, even if it goes against what we think is good or true. Think about sports teams. Think about, maybe office culture. The examples in here of like Greek stuff are, obvious and kind of more extreme. But think about things that maybe family members do to each other or friends, groups do to one another to prove, that you're one of us. Well, I don't want to, or gangs for that matter, right? Like I don't want to break a window or smash someone's car, but I do kind of want to be a part of this group. And so I'm going to go do it anyway. And the very effort, the very kind of hurdles that I leap over to become part of this new thing proves why it's worth doing, right? So the effort, the energy is very compelling in and of itself, right? It's like the fact that I did it is proof of why it's worth doing, if that makes sense. Then we get into induced compliance, another really interesting kind of dynamic here. So if you're able to, think about that phrase, induced compliance. It's really sexy and kind of terrifying at the same time. You're inducing someone's compliance. What's compliant? I'm just like, okay, You're inducing someone's like consent, their agreement, their involvement. Inducing is to like subtly win them over. So if you're able to get someone to do something, however you manage to get that, the weird part is how people will convince themselves after the fact that it's what they wanted anyway, right? So again, those kind of rationalization techniques kick in once we're in a place that we might not want to be in. It might be dissonant with who we think we are, what we care about, or so on. So now I have to figure out how to reconcile that. And so, again, the rationalizations kick in. All right, so let me speed up here. On page 248 and 249, there's some good stuff on kind of, like key themes. And what I noticed here is the kind of the continuity of the themes of the unpleasantness and its relationship to some sense of like ego or self-perception or identity, I think. That runs through a lot of this stuff. Self-esteem, you look bad in front of others, and responsibility. That's the first one. And then the last one is about self-perception. All of these things have to do with who I think I am, right? I think I am this. My self-perception is this. My ego is this. I'm the kind of person who is this. And then the tension kicks in when we are kind of forced, compelled, whatever, to when we act, when we express, when we state, when we do, and those things fall out of step with who we think we are. And now the dissonance kicks in, and now the rationalizations begin, right? So we finish off, by the way, this stuff on page 251, dissonance and mental health, I think that's fascinating. Do please take a look at that. I think that's really interesting because we are talking about a kind of cognitive, again, discomfort, unsettling, feeling unpleasant. And it can get extreme, right? And, we talk a lot these days about kind of precarious mental health issues and so on. And I think a lot of it has to do with there's so much stuff coming at us through, the internet and information and all the stuff that's happening. And it's really hard to reconcile your own relationship between your inner selves and all this other outer stuff. I think that's part of it. And so there's some interesting, like, it's okay, don't worry about it so hard. Expect to experience dissonance after decision. Like, just expect it. It's normal kind of thing. You don't have to eliminate the dissonance immediately. Don't expect perfection. Don't expect 100% consistency across everything you think and do. Don't feel bound to each and every commitment you make. You can change. You can change your views. You can change your ideas. It's not the end of the world. This happens all the time. We do it. It's a good thing. It means we're evolving. It means we're growing. Recognize that some people need consistency more than others. So again, Bill Burr gets up on stage and's like, hey, some of you might think all choice. Some of you all might all think all life. I'm kind of both, right? That's who I am. Deal with it. Admit your mistakes. Okay, we change, but we can sort of, acknowledge the fact that, like, I definitely, I shouldn't have been eating so much meat, so much industrial meat for so long, but I've come to my senses and I've made my changes, and on and on. Now, at the end here, we finish off with this business of persuasion, and basically, persuasion kicks in where dissonance becomes an opening for, taking advantage of the fact that there is this disconnect between the perceived self and the expressed. Oh, that's good. The perceived self and the expressed self, right? Who we think we are internally, and then how we actually enact our those preferences and how we actually behave in a given moment, right? So persuasion can sort of take advantage of the tension. Can take advantage of the disconnect between the perceived and the expressed, right? And so you can sort of play around with that. And we're going to probably look at more examples of how that becomes a resource for persuasion. But to start off with the kind of baseline of the internal, the external, the tension between who we think we are, how we express ourselves, how prevalent that is, and a lot of the ways that we attempt to rationalize and justify that stuff. It's really potent stuff, and you can see why this is such a huge theory and popular theories, because it's so fundamental to like who we are and how we live, sort of moment to moment, both inside our brains and inside our bodies, but also outside in the world and living our lives and making our choices and expressing ourselves through those choices and through our language and through our utterances and statements. And then we have to kind of constantly kind of catch up with ourselves and reconcile and change and justify and rationalize. So fascinating stuff. I'll stop there. That's plenty. And we will move on to inoculation. See you in the next one. Cheers.